This episode is sponsored in part by PTZOptics. Why hire a camera operator when the control is in your hands? Visit PTZOptics.com for more information. And by NewTek, makers of the TriCaster TC1. Stun your viewers, not your accountant. Visit newtek.com for more information.
Welcome, everybody, to Salt Talk, the monthly show that we do for houses of worship to help you reach your goals in ministry. As always, I am joined by the man, the myth, and the legend, the guy that's on the front lines for the war in the Ukraine. We've got Mr. Greg Terry.
Good morning, Stephen. I am pumped about this show because two reasons. A, it's going to be a huge help, and many people had questions about it last month in our stream. And secondly, we've got a phenomenal guest, so this is going to be a great hour together. I'm pumped.
So if you're the man, the myth, and the legend, this guy is the professor, and we've got the professor, John Mahoney from neuralnet.com. Welcome, sir.
How's everyone? Thank you for having me here.
This guy, if he can't automate it, it can't be automated, okay? So we brought on the guy. John, for those that may not know, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself and what you do before we kind of dive into the automation process.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Greg.
Yes, sir.
I'm John Mahoney. I am from NeuralNet. We have a remote guest solution that's actually basically been upgraded for the past 12 years. And now it is a 12-guest remote solution that allows you to have these types of conversations, which we think are a key part of sort of the discourse that can take place online, and especially when it comes to education or topics of interest to a community. So that's basically our core product. I also host a weekly show called the Streaming Alchemy Show, and on that we tend to cover a lot of topics around scripting, automation, different types of video constructs you can do to make your videos more engaging, to add more dynamic elements. And basically we, both with the company and with the Streaming Alchemy Show, we always welcome, questions. People want to learn. We're always happy to share and be a part of the learning process.
Awesome. Yeah. And this is one of those shows. I had it pulled up there. You want to take time, and thankfully John records it, because it's one of those things you need to go back and watch over and over, because you're going to pull something else out of it, which is good, right? Replayability on it. But you break it down for everybody and give them the ability to go step by step. And that's something that our audience has been asking for. Greg, you had mentioned last month. These months are running together like weeks. About your church and how you guys were doing an automation application for your screens that you now have
Yes.
in your Welcome Center, right?
Yeah, so I think your description there of John being the professor was exactly right. He reminds me of the professor from Gilligan's Island. Brilliant man. And when you do, I am a friend of John. I'm also a client of John's, and I am a viewer because I've learned so much from Streaming Alchemy on his videos, because he really breaks it down in very conversational, very logical order for how to use scripts, do automation, and it's phenomenal. So there's that plug. But for our church locally, we did a renovation, and I think last month was the month I showed the video of it, and we've incorporated these huge new video welcome boards, and basically we were able to do it very cheaply on a budget. Got a very good engineer that works with me at church, and we took 3, I think 75-inch TVs, took the bezels around them to the narrowest, and actually filed the bezels down, put them together, created our own video wall, and from that it was about a $500 or $600 controller off of Amazon and a Mac Mini. So now we have a video wall. We use VLC to run graphics, whether it's videos or text welcomes, and the image like you see in corporate places or maybe in your churches. We created the video wall. Well, the problem is our church is very busy. So on Mondays, we have a Celebrate Recovery ministry helping those with addictions. On Wednesdays, we have an in-depth Bible study. During the mornings, Monday through Friday, we have a preschool that meets on our campus. On Fridays, we have other ministries that we do. So the bottom line, it's changing every day. So my media guy goes, okay, PG, I do not want to come up every day and have to change the welcome video. So fortunately, one of our guitar players is a pretty high level programmer. Even living here in Western Pennsylvania, does most of his work out in California, very high level. He says, guys, give me 1 month. I'm going to write a program. I'm going to give you a website and I'm going to create an app. And Chris, you will be able to sit at home, load your videos up, send it right to the church. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect it to the church calendar. And at 9 a.m., Monday through Friday, it's welcome to Treehouse Preschool. At 5 p.m., it will say, welcome to Celebrate Recovery, and it will be built off of a calendar. So we're probably in 1 more month, I'll be able to actually show you that working. It's going to be incredible. So
Awesome.
for sure,
Well,
it's necessary.
John, obviously we've got all different scopes of folks that are watching this, from novice all the way up to I want to say the expert level that will tune into this at some point or another, whether it's on the reruns or not. The biggest question that we had last month was, how can I control my cameras if I'm sick or if I'm traveling or if I need to have somebody, remote into it? What is the best option? And so that's where you come in. That's where we invited you on, because we wanted your expertise when you're doing this automation stuff. I know you've got a bunch of different solutions. So to answer that question, what's the first thing that you would throw at somebody?
Okay, so if somebody's looking for a way to control their remote cameras, there's 2 sides to that will have to be addressed. The first is you need to be able to see the video from these cameras in a remote location. Because if you're going to make adjustments, if you're going to, change the framing, change presets, you need to be able to see what that video is coming back. So there's a technology out there called SRT, Secure Reliable Transport, that is actually built into, I know all of the new PTZOptics cameras have it, and other cameras and encoders have this as well, which will allow you to set up a stream that can cross the internet reliably at a low enough bandwidth that somebody could view it at a remote location. So that would be the first piece. The second piece is you need to have a way to control that camera. So the way camera control works typically, if you're using something like a SuperJoy controller, the way that would work is that you send specific commands to an IP address, to basically a device address that's available to every device on a network, and to a specific port. So the difference really is that each address can have multiple ports. So you can have different applications on a device listening on different ports for different commands. So not to get too complicated. But what it basically means is that you need some way now to, when you're connecting to that remote location, you typically can't connect to that camera directly. So you will need to have an intermediary, usually the router at the church or other venue that you're broadcasting from. You need to have the ability for that to forward the commands you are sending from something like a SuperJoy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you. I have something that I set up here, which I'm controlling a camera that's on a separate network. So this would be very, very similar to what you would see if you were working with a remote church operation. And what I can do is I can take and basically make adjustments to what I have going on with the camera. This is actually, we're using a Studio Pro camera here, so I don't have pan and tilt, but it would work equally well with pan and tilt. You have the ability to, if I set the camera, I could go in and just go to presets and have it jump automatically between different presets. So it gives you an ability to remotely control the camera. And in addition, because I'm getting this video back, you could even do things where somebody could switch a service remotely, where if they could, in addition to getting the video back, also get audio come back, which you can do through a lot of cameras where you can embed the audio. You have then a solution to fully switch and produce a remote production from a church without having to have a whole crew at that at the church at any given time. Which, especially for non-service based things where there may be different prayer groups or other things, having somebody who could attend to that from a remote location would be great, because that way you can minimize the footprint you need at the church, but still be able to provide the technical services for that part of the ministry.
So because SRT, excuse me, is you know, you have to have a streaming server to do that, right? The SRT stuff. What would be a way that they could do that if they've never heard of this? They're going SRT, what? NDI, huh? Like, I don't understand this concept. You're talking, come on, professor, bring it to me here. Like, I have no clue what you're talking about. What would you suggest?
So at a baseline, I would suggest going on to YouTube and learning a little bit about SRT. It would be listed as either the letters SRT or Secure Reliable Transport.
Mm-hmm.
So that will give you sort of a baseline to work from to understand what it can do. But as a technology, there are really a limited set of basic steps you need to do. So one of the things you can do is you can get onto a PTZOptics camera, and by getting on that camera, you can just go through a browser, connect, and it will let you set up the specific types of settings you need for SRT. And I don't want to dive deeply into the tech on this, but there are different ways where you can have one side calls the camera, which is one approach, and the camera becomes a listener. So there's a caller and a listener, where the camera is listening for somebody to call them, and when they call, it makes that connection. That's probably a very common way, but it could also work the other way, where the camera is always calling out and saying, as soon as somebody's listening to me, I'll connect with them. So different ways to handle that, but it is really just a limited set of settings. I have to set up a couple of IP addresses, set up a couple of ports. So yes, Stephen has this here. So this is really how you turn SRT on. You say, how do you want this to be set up? And then you basically say, what is the IP address and the port? And the way SRT works is it uses a slight delay to make sure that it can, any packets, any of the video frames that could get lost in transport, that it has the ability to ask for them again, because the internet itself is typically unreliable for high load, real-time video streams. But by having that delay, it basically acts as a buffer and allows the remote side to say, give me the video, I'll hold it for half a second, and if anything falls out that got lost on the internet, I'll ask you to send it again. And if it all comes within that half second, the video stream looks perfect on the other side. So it is something that's actually, because it's built into cameras, it means you don't need a lot of technical infrastructure on the remote side. But really, that's all you're doing. You're setting up maybe 4 or 5 different settings, and then inside anything like OBS or vMix or the TriCaster, you can then take and subscribe to that SRT feed and just pull that in. And there are different ways to do that. But on each side, it's a fairly simple set of things. And I'd be happy in the comments after to share some links for things that I think are great overviews and explanations for how to do that.
Yeah, right now we just want to tackle ways that, hey, look, we can do it. I know you've gone in depth on some of your videos. Greg, you've watched some of them too. Like,
Yeah.
he's gone super in depth. And so we want to kind of talk to you about what is possible here. And obviously we'll do a little show and tell. And I know people get worried. You start bringing up these acronyms. I do it too. And everybody's like, oh dear Lord, it's something else I got to learn. And it's almost next to impossible. I'm going to be spending hours to do this. But you just showed, with it built into the PTZOptics cameras, it's simple.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, and this is really important, especially in the ministry space, is that you tend to have a smaller group in the media ministries that will work on the deeper technology, and then you have a larger group that can typically work on operating everything. From an operational point of view, SRT is dead simple. So when you start things up, these connections just happen. I don't have to do anything special. So once this is set, if you have your cameras in your church set up to work over SRT, and somebody brings up a OBS or a vMix or a TriCaster remotely, those connections will just happen. They'll see them as if they're any other camera on their network. And I think that's the important piece. It gives you this ability to have a small technical crew get everything set up, but still have a much larger part of the ministry work to make sure that, you have the engagement from everybody in the faith community there that wants to participate. They can do that. It shouldn't be a barrier to them. And in fact, it opens it up by being something that you can use remotely to more people, maybe people that can't make it in physically on a consistent basis because of health issues or, a home care for elder parents or other things that could stop them. It gives them now ability to still participate, not just to watch,
right,
but become a participating member of the community.
Panda Kaizen wanted to know, she would love to links on how to do this with OBS. Is this possible with what you're showing? Is this possible with OBS?
Yes, it is possible with both OBS and with vMix. I'll make a note and see if I can get some good links to show how it would be set up in OBS. But yes, it works in both.
Awesome. What do you think, Greg, so far? I mean,
I think that SRT is POC.
I saw you put that in the chat room. I had to laugh.
SRT
I'm gonna pull that
is
up.
a piece of cake. So,
Piece of cake.
well, here's the deal. Stephen, you nailed it. And especially in the faith community and in churches and houses of worship, 99.9% of churches are volunteer-based ministry.
Yep.
And John is 100% correct. You typically have an extremely small circle, usually one person, let's be real, maybe two. Even in larger churches that are really, really the deep divers, the knowledgeable ones, the ones that can set it up, make it happen. And then you have your next level of those that can be trained to operate. What I think is important to share for those that are watching is do not allow the technological terms to intimidate you. Honestly, you get out what you put in. So you choosing to spend this hour or watch this later on rebroadcast, you're gaining knowledge. And it really is not as overwhelming as we think most oftentimes in regard to streaming, church ministry, technology. It's just a little bit of work, repetition, and finding the right community such as this, Salt Talk, for learning, growing. So my encouragement is do not be intimidated. Do not say, well, okay, well, that's cool for, your mega churches, whatever. No, it's great for everybody. One of the things that churches of all sizes have a major problem with, and this kind of goes partner to partner, is you do have the one expert. The person, it's their passion, They're watching YouTubes every night. They're setting everything up, but they're on vacation for a couple of weeks. And all of a sudden, everybody that's operating is nervous. I think another benefit of spending some time today talking about remote access is the other side of it, not just for the camera work and the setup, but also troubleshooting.
Yes.
An audio is routed wrong, something of that nature. So I know here in a little bit, we're additionally going to talk about things that are even down simpler, where your expert could remote in, access, take a peek at vMix, take a peek at ProPresenter, Easy Worship, whatever, and help fix it. Even if they're on vacation, they just call in for 2 minutes. So there's solutions for every level.
John,
they're easy.
John, so showing the SRT model that you just showed, like Greg was saying, that's something that comes up not last week, but the 2 weeks prior to that. I wasn't at the church because I was at conventions. I was in Cleveland, and then I was at Pittsburgh. I was a guest. I was streaming from the floor. Your son was helping me configure a few things to do that. Fortunately, my guy that does my production and producing when I'm on the road, I've trained him to do the production there, so he knows how to do it. But let's say, like Greg's saying, you don't have somebody to do that, and you're traveling for work, or in my case, I'm at a convention, but they need a 2-minute quick, this is how I got to fix this. I need some help. I need you to take a look at it. What do you do?
So let me switch over to this camera. So if I were to look at this, there's two sides. First is you have to, when you work with people up front, establish sort of a common vocabulary for what you call things and how you identify different parts of the workflow. So part of it is, if you need to work with somebody remotely and quickly, having that vocabulary where you talk about, your switcher as a certain way, and you talk about your, certain audio inputs as certain, it becomes an easy way to communicate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are a multitude of options for letting somebody remotely connect to computer systems. And because these computer systems tend to then all be on a network, once you connect remotely to a computer system in your church, you would typically then be able to see your audio mixer that's also on the network. And, if you have Dante audio feeds and you have all your cameras, you'd get to see all of that. So the diagnostic piece can also be fairly straightforward because you can connect. So I think those two things, sometimes you'll be able to identify things, but you'll still need to have somebody understand what it is they need to do physically hands-on there. So having those things sort of settle down, where you call the pastor's microphone the same thing all the time, and you talk about the choir mics and the different cameras, you have a way to identify those quickly and crisply, and people understand. So it may be having numbers on things where you turn around and say, on camera number 4, and everybody knows what camera 4 is, and you're not using sort of other descriptive things. You just have fixed things, and the same with microphones or other things. And it could be the same with systems. If you have multiple systems that could potentially do overlapping things, multiple vMix systems, one's doing signage, the other's live streaming, you could turn around and say, I have those all labeled uniquely too. So it can make that diagnostic phase more seamless for them, because now you're talking to them with absolute directions of what they need to do.
So one of the suggestions that we made, I think last week, if I'm not or I keep saying last week because for me it's been a blur, honest to God. We mentioned about a Google remote desktop. I don't like using TeamViewer for remote controlling cameras, only because there is a little bit of latency, and TeamViewer tends to kick you out just randomly. Like, I don't know if it just loses connection. I've had that happen in the past, even just doing remote troubleshooting. Log Me In is another one that I've suggested in the past, where that can also run into some issues. The biggest issue that I've seen across the board with those, TeamViewer and Log Me In, is you have the most updated version because, let's face it, you're diligent and you do your updates when they are done. But the client computer, not necessarily. So now they're fumbling, John, because they're trying to update their app. They have no idea how to do it. And so now you're spending another additional 45 minutes trying to get the app updated just so you can get in and troubleshoot.
Yeah. So there's typically, I mean, this is where, the Chrome Remote Desktop is probably the easiest solution, because typically Chrome keeps itself updated, and you then have the ability to easily connect. And then if you needed to do something, so for instance, if somebody wanted to remotely switch from, say an OBS system or even a TriCaster, I would recommend using something like Parsec, which is another remote client, but that works very, very well with sort of video production. It's in fact what Amazon recommends for controlling like vMix on a cloud instance if people are doing remote cloud production. So that would be something that I would look at if I wanted to do that. But if it comes to just doing things that are purely diagnostic, Chrome Remote Desktop, I think, is an excellent choice, and it's free, so it fits. That I know fits within the budgets of most churches. So you certainly have that going for it as well, and it is it is as secure as any of the other solutions that I've seen out there for this type of level of production.
And Greg, you've seen that even at your church, right? Where
Yes.
you've had to not just do the troubleshooting side of it, right? You or Chris, you had to get in there and move a camera and see what it was doing, right? And obviously you have latency.
Many
right?
times. Yeah. And the ability to take a peek remotely, it's like a golden egg. I'm gone. I travel a lot. Chris is at work. They're trying to do an event. Everything was set up. And all of a sudden, we had this actually happen a couple of months ago. Our main cam, which is the PTZOptics 4K move, we just lost network connection with it, and it was a very simple fix, but only Chris or I could fix it. So there was a quick call, a remote, and it was done, and everybody was happy. No stress. Nobody had to make an emergency leave from work to go fix it. All of those things. So it's good. John,
good.
let me ask you a question, practically speaking, because I know this community, the houses of worship. Like, I leave Saturday next week in Nevada. I'm setting up a new camera system. Yeah, they bought PTZOptics. And integrating their audio. I'm speaking out there to church, and they says, well, you're coming, so can you help us with our sound system and our cameras? I said, I'll be glad to help you. So, we help each other in this community. This is what I see the most when I'm traveling to churches. It is not that they don't have a decent computer. It's not that they have not invested in decent cameras, decent audio hardware. They have good stuff, but they continually fail because they did not, in my opinion, do the most important step, and that was get dedicated internet/server/access that is only for the technical ministry of the church. You cannot be trying to do all of this and 75 people while the pastor is preaching is scrolling through their Facebook, and they're all on the network that you created with your church. So as a practical help, how important is it for churches, any size, to have dedicated access just for tech ministry, especially if we're going to be looking at doing remote access applications?
100% agree. This is one of those things where I don't think people appreciate it. You have to have not just a dedicated network, but you have to really understand that network, because in a digital age, that is as much a connection with the community as the church itself. There are so many people who rely on that digital connection, and not just for services, but for a lot of other ministries that can be taking place. So getting that right, having it dedicated, having it set up so that, like you've mentioned, Greg, it can be approached by somebody who isn't necessarily technical. So you have, like, we always have a cable here that you can just plug a laptop into, and it's set up, and we know exactly how, when you plug that laptop, how that's going to look. So, things like that, where it's not just on the back end in the closet having that organized correctly, but also on the front end to say, I know I have something that's very easy for volunteers to use when they're working on our network. But getting that network right, and putting that upfront attention is critical. And it's funny because it's true with automation in general. It's that upfront investment that's important. And it's right. There's like this Aesop's fable where he talks about when he started on a trip, he volunteered to take the basket that carried all the food for everybody that was on the trip with him, even though that was the heaviest basket, because he knew that over time people would be eating the food and that basket would get lighter and lighter. And there's a real truth to that in this context as well, where if you make that upfront investment in how you set up your technology, on how you implement automation, that's something where it is a lot of heavy lifting, more lifting than you do if you just sort of was winging it across. But that pays dividends as you continue down that journey. And I think that's an important thing for people to consider. That's a very worthwhile investment to make up front.
Well, I can tell you from my experience, and next week I'll be in Nevada helping a church fix this very problem. You basically have a mansion with 31 bathrooms in it, and you have a half-inch line heading out to the sewer line heading out to the infrastructure. That's what we do. We go in our churches and we watch a few YouTube videos. Oh, I've got to get this camera. Pastor approves it. Oh, we've got to get this soundboard. The committee approves it. We've got to have this. And you put it all in there and you go, I've got everything I need. Get it all set up and you have nothing but problems. Why? Because the foundation wasn't laid first. How are you going to operate all those beautiful bells and whistles you've put into your church? So equally, if not more than equal, make sure your networks, your internet connections that you're using for ministry on the tech side are really dedicated and prepared for what you want to do. And that's, once again, that's simple YouTube stuff. That's how to set up switches, all of these things. PTZOptics has resources, streaming alchemy. I'm sure it's not that complicated, but it needs to be done right.
Yeah, otherwise your automation's not going to work at all. It doesn't matter what you set up. So, Greg, you're saying you're traveling next weekend to Las Vegas, and that you're going to be doing all this stuff. So that means my phone needs to be put on Do Not Disturb that whole weekend.
No, your phone will need to be on, and John Mahoney's will need to be on, and I expect immediate answers when I call, and I'm in over my head.
I'm teasing. But John, so a lot of these guys that are watching this, they use OBS, and obviously they have our cameras, and so what's some of the simple solutions that people can do to automate it? Like, let's just say when the camera goes live, that maybe the mics turn on. If obviously they have to be using a digital board or some sort, but are there easy ways of doing that with OBS?
So probably if I were to think of the easiest ways to do a lot of these things, it would be to get something like a Stream Deck, where you can then set up inside the Stream Deck multiple commands. You can group them together to say, when I press this button, I want to execute this command, then wait this long, then execute this command, then wait this long. So you actually have the ability, without getting into any sort of macro programming or anything else, inside of a Stream Deck, you can do that in a very standard way. And they have a whole range of prices. There's right now, they always have Black Friday sales, they have Prime Day sales, all these other things. So it's something that is a very affordable but very worthwhile upgrade if you're moving in the automation space, especially because it has a lot of these types of things programmed into them. And once you do that, there are smart apps that can be installed on the Stream Deck that help with a lot of these types of things. So I think that's its simplest thing.
Can I interject there, John, before you move on?
Absolutely. Sure.
Okay, so Steven, give me full cam. And so, guys, here's my setup. And this is not for church. This is my studio where I do all of my YouTube stuff. But you can see I run between 70 and 100 inputs in vMix for my updates in regard to Ukraine, Israel, all that jazz. And my golden friend right here is this Stream Deck. So I use tons of automation in Stream Deck. When it's time for my stream to start, for example, I hit one button. It's actually right here, this green one that says intro. That triggers about 10 different sequences. The intro rolls, bumper rolls, camera comes in, screens come up, all happens through automation. And I'm going to tell you, this is so simple. And for a church, this would be my number one example. And I just wanted you to see, I do exactly what John says, and my application here will absolutely translate over to churches. It's golden.
Yeah, I think it's one of the important things, and this is different in the ministry production space than in others, is that if you use these capabilities for different aspects of the church ministry, there are all different workflows. The workflow for a service is different from the one for maybe prayer groups, for other types of counseling groups that you may be engaging with remotely and need to do these types of productions. And the Stream Deck can just adapt. So when you bring this up, it can be reconfigured on the fly for each one of these different types of workflows that are involved. So it's different. Like I know for like the productions you do, Greg, and you do, Stephen, there's a lot of consistency in that. But these things vary all the time. As Greg, you point out, like you have your calendar that's saying what's next. You are basically doing the same thing with, if you have to support those in the digital aspects of a ministry, those workflows are all going to be different for each one of these things. And, that's something that the Stream Deck adapts to very, very well.
And technically speaking, please do not be overwhelmed by Stream Deck. It is so simple to use, wonderful tutorials out there, and a 20-minute investment, you're pushing toward you'll have a very comfortable understanding of using the Stream Deck. I mean, there are many times right in the middle of my streams, I want to throw in a different shortcut real quick. I'll throw a video on. I'm changing it in vMix live, real time, while I have another video going. It's not that complicated to learn, and it's a huge blessing.
So you can see I just pulled up the interface here. I just happened to pull up OBS now. Obviously, I don't have OBS here or anything, but it's a matter to program the buttons. It's a matter of dragging and dropping. I mean, you can change the icons down here. I know when you start getting into configuring things like vMix and TriCaster, it's a little bit, we'll say it's a little bit more difficult. And I don't want to say it to scare anybody, because the way I do it is I run it over the network. So I do have.
There's my setup, Stephen. It'll show you real time.
Oh, there we go. We'll just go to.
So I'll show you this. Guys, it's simple.
But how long did it take you to program that?
Minutes.
Right.
Dude, I can. All right, you ready? I've got a video here of Slava Ukraina. Okay, here we go. I'm going to set this up, and boom, I'm gonna set from a file. I want it to be green. Okay, I'm gonna put in Slava.
So you're naming the button.
I'm naming
right now.
the input.
Yep.
Okay, and then I'm just going to go to vMix,
and that changes it in real time. So it's not like you're waiting for anything.
I'm going to add a shortcut, and
just so everybody understands who.
I'm over on a different monitor now where my vMix is. I'm going to add a shortcut, and I'm going to find it. I click find, which you can't see. I literally push the button on the Stream Deck. I click OK, close, cancel, OK, and then boom.
And it plays the video.
Now, I did that in seconds. So for a church, it's huge, because let's say the pastor wants to show a video clip in the middle of his sermon, and you're sitting here going, holy moly, I got to remember to click it. Now put the hot button in your Stream Deck real quick, and pastor calls for it, boop, hit the button. It's going to work.
And I want to add to that with the Stream Deck, because John, that's a fantastic suggestion. I use Stream Deck here as well. I use it for multiple applications, whether it's running Central Control, it's running TriCaster, Wirecast, vMix, all the tools that I use, OBS. I actually have two. I have the XL sitting in front of me, and then I have the original one sitting over there at my gaming setup. One of the cool things with that is, let's say you don't really have the funds right now for the hardware version of this. They actually make an iPad and iOS app subscription. I believe, I want to say it's $20 or $30 a year that you can have it then on your phone. So you don't need the hardware device, and you could still press the buttons as a Stream Deck and control it without actually, maybe you don't have $150. Maybe you're a church plant and you just don't have that kind of money to drop on that. Look into the Stream Deck applications for your mobile devices, because they'll do the same thing. You just don't have that tactile feedback. What do you guys think?
How about this, Stephen? If you're using vMix, I'm not sure about OBS, and I'm sure they have the same. But for vMix, I don't even need a Stream Deck. I could literally just program hotkeys on my keyboard right here as shortcuts. I could run F1 through F12 and bring them in as inputs for free.
Yep. Let's take a look at this question that just came up or comment. I shouldn't say it's a question that came up in the chat room. It says, I'm weary to get into automation, and maybe John, you can elaborate on some of this, because I'm struggling with NDI through my network. A 30x NDI model. I'm assuming he means the PTZOptics 30x. Do I need to learn about layer 3 or VLAN? I think Stream Deck does 6 free buttons on iPad, then pay for Pro upgrade, right? So they do have some stuff. But go ahead, John.
So let me sort of jump to the end before we get to the meat of the question. Typically, anytime there are issues with NDI, it is likely related to some ways that the network is set up. And NDI is advertises plug and play, but you do need to have some basic network infrastructure guidelines around how to set this up. So basically keeping things on the same network switch. So your switcher where you're sending the video signal and the camera. So things like that can make a big difference. If you're hopping across multiple switches, there can be issues with that. There can be issues with the way NDI is being sent. There are multiple ways. There's IP, reliable UDP, and standard UDP. So each one, your network has to basically align. Your network setup should align with how you're using it. Typically, just plain UDP or reliable UDP are probably the two best ways to get it. But I think the network is going to, in almost every case, be at the root of a lot of the issues people see with NDI-based technical problems. And this is not, I don't mean that as a criticism. Clearly it's advertised as plug and play. It just needs a little more sympathy in the way the network is set up to make sure you handle that correctly. But automation itself really shouldn't be that scary. And I think, as Greg was pointing out, there are a few basic concepts, but once you have those down, it becomes something that opens up a whole range of new possibilities, especially around raising the quality of what you deliver at the same time as making the operation of that quality accessible to the inexperienced volunteer membership that you have as part of your production crew.
And that
The
goes back
basket
to,
gets lighter.
well, I was just going to say, it goes
Absolutely.
back to his network, what you said about the network, right? Making sure that that is
Yep.
set up. And one thing that I found out, because I had this problem too, is a lot of people don't set up their networks correctly. They just daisy chain switches and things like that. And if you guys go on the PTZOptics YouTube page, myself, Matt Davis, we did a show on Tech Town Hall. It should be listed there. Setting up networks, I believe it was. It was like a year ago or maybe half a year ago. Matt does a deep dive into how your network should be set up, where you go from the modem to the router and then out to your switches as needed, and the proper way to do that to ensure that you're not getting any latency, if not very minimal latency, because you're not supposed to daisy chain a certain amount of switches together because you'll get that latency. And I tend to, based on Matt's suggestion, tend to keep all my NDI devices, and maybe that's just the OCD in me, is keeping the NDI devices on one switch. So that way I know that if something happens to one NDI device, I know it's not the switch, right? Because all of them would go down, right? So I tend to do that. I have my gaming stuff on one switch. I have my computers on another switch that aren't NDI or I'm not using for NDI. That's just me, okay? John, do you want to kind of talk to that as well? I mean, do you think that some of these guys should be setting this up in this fashion to help with the automation as well for minimal latency?
Yeah, I definitely recommend trying to keep all of your NDI devices, if possible, on a single switch. The other thing that I didn't mention before, and it just occurred to me as you were talking, the switches, if you have something that came from your ISP and they came and installed sort of this router with 4 additional ports or 6 additional ports on the back, I would absolutely use that only as an uplink. Those switches are not designed for having those ports cross-talk and everything else. I would recommend getting even a standard unmanaged Netgear switch, uplink that into that router, and then have all your NDI devices on that simple switch. That would be a much better way. That is still very, very affordable. And if you're using the PTZOptics cameras with the NDI HX2 or HX3, that should work fine on a standard switch. If your setup is fairly basic, that should be a great first step. But I think that would help a lot.
And like we said, there's videos out there. I know, Greg, we watch a lot of the vMix videos because they're out there. And I know, John, you've got a ton of videos. I want to put it out there. We got about 10 minutes left here in the show. I want to put it out there to the audience. If you have any questions or you want more clarification on things, we can even do a show in the future with just strictly in Zoom, where instead of broadcasting it to YouTube, we'll do it into Zoom. We'll record it, upload it to YouTube later, where we could do some Q&A, maybe have John back on and really like do a deeper dive where you can ask some questions. But Greg, I'm going to hand it to you here for a second. But if you have a question, put it in the chat room. I'll pull it up for any of us or John. Just put it in there, like put questions, so I know it's a question.
I want to go on topic / off topic for one moment in something that I suggest would be very helpful for automation. Now, today we've got John with us. We're talking about networks, scripting, remote access, these things that are a little bit next level, but very doable for anybody. But in a church house of worship setup, and no, this was not planned. This just hit my brain right now. For automation, let's use that word also for maybe some camera work that can kind of run on cruise control automation. Meaning, I'm just going to throw this out here, but this camera right here is phenomenal. We use this at our church, and I'm just telling you this, I'm going to call this automation because the tracking, the auto tracking, when you set it up correctly, a little bit of work before the service, and your pastor, speaker, walking around the pulpit or their lectern speaking, this camera really does do a wonderful job of following, focusing, imaging. You can set up different shots. But for the automation side of it, now my guy that maybe is running the Super Joy or running the vMix has a little bit of pressure off of him where some of these other things that need some attention can be handled. So not just on the network side of automation, but also on the hardware side with cameras and other things that can make our lives easier. Because remember, we're not here in this Salt Talk and Houses of Worship Help to make the next blockbuster for our church service. You know, we want to do high quality. We want to do excellence because that's what the kingdom of God is about. But remember, our call is for ministry and to present the gospel in the best way. So by using automation and cameras, and this technology is just going to be more and more and more and very quick. Get in now if you have the ability, because the basket will get lighter as you go forward. The basket will get lighter.
I'm excited with all the things that I'm seeing and hearing from different people around the industry. I'm sure you guys have seen it too. I'm excited of what's to come to make automation even more. I mean, John, I remember when you came out to my studio, you set up the live to air, and you kind of looked at me and you're like, "You're not using automation?" And I was like, I don't know anything about it. I haven't really dove into it. And you're like, "Wait a second." So you started on the TriCaster where data link, I believe that's the official terminology for it on the TriCaster, right? John goes, "I'm going to set something up for you." Him and his son, they were here, and set up data link to where I can just put a title. I use one lower third, so no matter what source I switch to, it switches to whatever that is. And he showed me how to go in there and do just things like that, and as well as other types of automation within the TriCaster to have, videos pull out, pull in with just hitting one button, macros, the whole 9 yards. For a self-producer, if you don't have a big volunteer base at your church, automation should be your friend. Like this should be something you should be researching. Like Greg said with the cameras, having it track. You don't have a camera operator. That's right. Set our cameras up, automatically track. John, I know you did some videos on it. You were really impressed with how the tracking was on it.
Yeah, the tracking, the Move 4K camera really is an excellent camera. I think if I were looking at this as sort of, it is the sweet spot in the PTZOptics line. It really is excellent color rendering. We could color match it easily with other cameras, both existing PTZOptics and even cameras like the Sony Cinema line. So we actually worked it on both ends, and it does blend very well. The 4K resolution, even if you're not shooting in 4K, having that extra resolution can be really useful, because maybe you want to record some things that are higher res and then repurpose it for different types of social media, where you're going to want to be able to do the basically 9:16 videos as well as 16:9, and having that wide space to cut out into can be very useful. Excellent camera, excellent auto tracking, and we were really impressed with it when we spent time with it.
Yeah, I think if you're on the fence, and this isn't a sales pitch, but this is something we implemented right away too. We had the Simple Track 2.
We did too.
We tested the Simple Track Lite. I had it here. We just took it over just to test it. It was a step up. And then finally going to the Move 4K, like John said, it was kind of like the sweet spot. So helping your your service, you're investing. If you're sitting around going like, what can I do? I don't have a lot of tech know-how. Getting a Move 4K and putting it on your pastor, setting it and forgetting. I think the biggest thing is there's no blocking zones. You don't have to do that. Remember with the Simple Track 2, you have to
Exactly.
set blocking zones.
Correct.
John could be here, Greg could be in my studio, and I could be tracking myself. They could walk in front of me. It don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to stay right on me. And I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to houses of worship. When you're tracking the pastor, you need to be able to do other things, right? Whether you're running a soundboard, because you're limited on who you have available. I think that opens the door. So that's one less body that you have there just doing this, panning around at the pastor, because he likes to walk around.
Let me, and I'll be done and we'll go to John, but listen, we can get down a very deep hole here real quick, but it's a really good hole, whether it's automation in the loose terms of a tracking camera, the deep things that we began to uncover today as far as scripting, automation, networks. But additionally, folks, if you're running in your church ProPresenter, my ProPresenter guy literally sits in the congregation and runs it with his Apple Watch. The service is scripted, timed, loaded up. He's not even in the booth. He's down there on his iPhone or on his watch going, okay, next. It makes it simple. You say, well, okay, you're crazy to do that. No, it makes us much more effective. And it's just a little bit of work that on the front end, when the basket's a little heavier, 6 months down the road, it's going to be amazing what you can do in your church. Doesn't matter if you're 50 in your congregation or 5,000. There's so much out there.
John, I want to throw this to you about your application, Live to Air with NeuralNet. A lot of people go, they're sitting here watching this. They're going, hey, I'm a house of worship. I don't really bring a lot of missionaries in. It's not something I do to bring in, remote guests to do this. But I want to throw something out there that we kind of did with you innovationally at the convention that I was at, where we actually had my son and another guy take their phones and call in almost like guests, but they were like roaming reporters from the floor, right? They were walking around. They were in the parking lot doing stuff that normally people don't do. So I know a lot of houses of worship and churches, they like to go to different ministries as the service is going on and grab footage, right? The live video, like, hey, we're going to go to the kids' room or the youth room, or, we're going to go to our security, just to have that as footage to cut through. You can do that with your software through a phone, a tablet, Android or iOS, right? I mean, there's no limits to this.
Yeah, I think, part of this is that you can actually publish a single link to everybody in the community to say, if you want to join us, if you want to connect, you have something to say, to share. If you want to say a prayer, or you want to have the community say a prayer for some need, having that ability to say, I'm just publishing this, and I can bring that person in to say, here's what I need from my community. Here's what I want to share with my community. Here's what I want to offer to my community. Those types of things become much more dynamic, where you can have somebody sit there, say, okay, I have this person they want to connect. You see them, you pick them up, talk to them, say, okay, you ready? You can now, offer your prayer or whatever you want to do. And you could just do those things sort of in a free form workflow, where you don't need to have everything planned ahead of time. And I think in ministry, that can be very useful, because there's lots of times where you're going to want to have somebody can call in and ask for prayers, or talk about some experience they've had that they wanted to share at the community, even if they're not there. Like I said, everything isn't around the service. There's a lot to a digital ministry that, is far outside the walls of the church itself.
And because you're NDI, you can, we were able to, without a mixer, route audio and video and send it to and from where we needed it to go.
Remember, Stephen, I called in
right when we were at the convention
as a missionary. I'm in a war zone, and I was on Salt Talk calling in to Stephen from Ukraine through my iPhone through NeuralNet. I mean, I use NeuralNet and talk to people all over the world. It's really good, Stephen. You said the missionary side, but then John referred to the community side. I mean, just think about that. There's
options.
Really good, John. I haven't even thought about doing that in our community. So
Well, there's
I'm
options, right?
getting
Because
inspired.
people have asked, they said, well, how do you bring people in to use Skype, to use Google Meet? Well, this is the guy that made this. This is the guy that built the live to air. I've been using it, what now, John, going on 5 years, 4 or 5 years, something like that?
Probably at least, yes.
Longer than that, Stephen.
It's been a while, but you can get in $99 a year as an annual subscription, because everybody likes subscription based. It's not going to break your bank. And then you have, or if you want a perpetual license at $7.99, and I believe you even go as far as doing custom boxes if people actually want the custom computer in their rack, just so it's dedicated, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at it where, like Greg said, there's sometimes you have people who want to be technical and are going to set up their own hardware. Others want to just say, I want to purchase something that is, I plug it in, turn it on, and it does what I need. So, we try to address both sides of that community there.
So, John, there is a question here before we got to wrap up. From Alex, he says, John, did you say you use automation for color correction, or is that only for the same brand cameras? We have a PTZOptics 30X and 2 phone cameras. And he goes on to say, I'm suspecting AI can help with that somehow.
Yeah, so we weren't talking about automation for color correction, even though that is definitely a possibility. And I've seen it done very well in applications like DaVinci Resolve, where they're using AI to match the color science in camera shots, and it does an excellent job of that. But a lot of cameras, sometimes you can't really get them to match up accurately. You'll get the reds to match, and then the blacks will look gray. You'll end up with those variants, and that's what I was mentioning. Really, was the 4K camera here, we think, is much easier to color match than previous generations of the PTZOptics line. That's why we really, if you're looking at that, we think the sensors in that and the color science behind that is really well thought out.
Very cool. Hey, and if you guys, go ahead.
I think actually that brought something. I'm really starting to use some AI in audio production, some free tools. This is probably something we're going to need to explore down the road for future Salt Talk, for helping houses of worship not be intimidated by AI. It's not the Antichrist, and it can be very helpful. It's much in its infancy, but rolling. Secondly, we now are absolutely, without doubt, knowledgeable that John Mahoney is a genius. He's way out there.
Yeah, yes.
And third, we also recognize, if you put the 3 picture up, that you see John there with his neural net looking nice shirt. I'm wearing my gray buttoned up looking nice, and there you are in the gaming t-shirt. We've got everything covered.
We got everything covered. You know what? I went with this blue color. I looked at it and I didn't even think about like what was on it, because I'm usually lower like this and nobody really sees anything. So
I saw it. I said,
and I was
we
like,
got to close with that t-shirt.
That looks well. When I go to this, it just kind of looks good. Kind of, you don't really see it.
You look good.
So I was just kind of like, okay. But listen, the main thing, guys, go check out John's videos, because if you want to dive deep into it, he does this. And every Friday at 2 p.m., because I don't get to watch it live. I have to watch it in reruns. Sometimes I get to watch it live. Sometimes I have a meeting or I'm busy with work. Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, YouTube, Streaming Alchemy, right?
Yep.
You guys can go in there and ask John questions and give him ideas to do shows.
Yeah, we definitely try to be interactive. So
it's a great group.
And also, if you go to neuralnet.com, if you want to give his call-in system a try, it is, I always say it like this. It's a call-in system for broadcasters, made by broadcasters, because it gives you everything that you need from a broadcast standpoint. It's more than Skype. It's more than Google Meet. It's more than Zoom. It does what a broadcaster needs, from accessing remote audio, video sources, especially when you get a guy like Greg on, who you have to sit there for 20 minutes and teach him how to use it. No, I'm just kidding. It really does help, with setting that up. So John, thank you so much for coming on here and talking with us about this, and hopefully, you guys enjoyed this as well.
Thank you for having me. It's always a lot of fun getting to hang with you guys. So I appreciate everybody having me on here.
Thank you, John.
And this guy here, Mr. Greg Terry, if you want to keep up with the Ukraine war, are you kind of pivoting and doing both Ukraine now and Israel,
dude,
Gaza
yeah,
stuff now? Are you
I've
doing?
got lots of friends in the IDF, so absolutely we're doing nightly updates in regard to Israel and what's happening there. And listen, this is the House of Worship Salt Talk for PTZOptics. Everybody in here is aware that our world's in a very precarious position, so we're trying to just share truth and investigate together. It's a great group. Trying to learn and figure out what's going on in our world. So thank you, Stephen, for that. John, thank you as always. One thing I will tell you guys in regard to John, he's a stand-up guy. He cares. I am a neural net guy, and they take care of you. They really do. They care and recommend 5 stars. 5 stars.
Absolutely. YouTube.com/Greg Terry Experience. You can check him out. And I will say that as well. Sometimes I call John just to a workflow that I'm doing, and I'm like, I need to bounce this off of somebody that's going to understand my thinking here and go down this path. And even when it doesn't even pertain to it. So you want to check out his show if you want to learn more about not just automation, but just how workflows can work for you. So check that out. Guys, we also have a PTZOptics show on the 18th, I believe it is. I don't have it here in front of me, but Tess and Paul and the crew are going to be back. I believe that's either a Tuesday or Wednesday. Again, I don't have it here in front of me. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so to the PTZOptics channel here on YouTube so you can tune into all the great content from all the different hosts from all over. We all have a good time educating you guys to the best that we possibly can, and leave comments as to what you want us to cover next. If we can't do it, we'll find somebody that can. So until next time, guys, have a great month, and we'll see you later.